We are back once again with another update to my Zelda-like dungeon crawler. My focus this time has been laying the groundwork for the level design. This is so I have a better idea how enemies and AI is going to function for the next part of the project. So without further ado, let's get into it. So I started to create a new blockout for the map. So before I introduce enemies and all the AI and all that kind of stuff, I want to kind of work out what the actual environments are going to probably be like. So as you can see, we've got like 4 rooms here, and we've got this little corridor that comes around here as well. The first thing I had to do was kind of work out a scale. So everything, you can see there's a grid here. These little segments are made using Pro Builder, then I exported them into Blender. This is what they look like in Blender. So I've got all these different types of walls, all these different types of bases and floors and all these kind of things. So for example, this is like a corridor end with a doorway, and as you can see, we've kind of got, if I hide this, we've got these like smaller walls that are like the base. So we've got a floor, these base things, and then like a doorway or whatever, and there's loads of different ones of these, loads of different shapes and sizes for like different purposes. So down here we've got so far all the different shapes that I've created. So we've got just a basic floor. We quickly look at this, for example, we've got like, this is like a side wall in a room, so that everything's made out of up of these cells. And you'll see with these there's an invisible wall here, but it still casts a shadow. So if we go into this, for example, and then find the back wall, it's got shadows only set on. So if I were to turn it on to just normal, we've got shadows, but the whole point is so the wall's invisible. So then when the camera is looking down into the room, you'll see in a minute, we still have the shadow cast, but we've got this kind of open back area. I'll kind of talk a bit more about that in a minute, because when we get to the corridor, it gets a little complicated. So the first thing I did was set these up. I had to turn these all into prefabs. So there's a bunch of prefabs here. And then these prefabs have colliders on them for like character collision and all that kind of stuff. In the future, when it comes to rooms, all these meshes are going to be connected together, so it takes up less kind of memory when they're in the game. But for now, they're all split up into individual things. The reason I've done it this way is specifically for corridors, because I want with corridors to be able to construct these corridors freely by using cells, whereas rooms will probably be more set size. So this would be probably like one of the smaller rooms we'll have, but there'll be bigger rooms that would be a bit more elaborate and stuff. As of right now, we're only doing 1 floor, but in the future I plan to make some of these rooms be like 2 stories high. But for the purposes of introducing the enemies and all the nav meshes and all that kind of stuff, and how enemies are going to interact with the environment, this is good enough for now. Obviously this isn't final art, this is just placeholder kind of block out art, so we kind of get a vague idea of how the levels are going to be. So if I press on this room, you can see this kind of red outline. This is just a placeholder. But what this is all about is, if I were to expand it, you can see like this is now outside of the room. You can see there's the line stops here at the front of this wall. So you can see like the line ends here. So when I run the game, you'll see what this is actually doing. So if we move down to here, you'll notice the camera, the very edge of the camera is stopped here. And then if we walk up here, the very edge of the camera is now stopped here. And it's the same for left and right, but it ends at a certain point, which is like right on it's kind of like about 40% up from the side of the screen. And basically I had to create a bunch of like an algorithm using a lot of trigonometry to basically work this out. So the camera obviously has a frustum that comes out of it. So I had to to work out where the camera needs to stop relative to where the room is. I had to do a lot of like triangles, working out triangles from where the camera is pointing and all that kind of stuff to basically limit the anchor point of the camera from going outside the room. It's a lot more involved than you realize, but the result is this. So now, like, if you walk into the corner of the room, it's not going to like say pull like as if it was like this. Instead, it's like locking to the room. So as you can imagine, this is fairly easy when it comes to a room, but then the big problem is when you have to use this type of restriction for the camera on a corridor. So with corridors, I've had to set up this special bounds thing. So we've got multiple bound boxes. So if I were to click this one, you can see that over here there's a bound box. So this is where the camera is limited in this area. But then there's also this one, and this is where it's limited when you're in this area. But obviously there's a section here where the two overlap. And the same down here, there's a section down here where they all overlap. So I'll get the character into position so you can kind of see how this works. So at the moment we're in this hallway. So as you can see, the camera is now locked. And because the area, this top edge and this bottom edge, there's no way you can physically put the camera into these two edges. So what it does instead is it centers between these two lines. So you can see the camera isn't moving like anywhere when we move up or down or left or right, because it's kind of locked to this section. But as we enter this square area over here, I don't know if I put the gizmos on here, you can see when we enter this area over here, the camera suddenly moves. And now it kind of smooths back. So obviously this took me a long time to get working, but I got it working in the end. The main difficult part of getting this to work was actually getting the camera to be smooth. It took a few attempts to get that right. Especially because there's more complications with obviously locking when you change to different rooms, which I'll show later, how the camera suddenly snaps to areas. Originally when you'd get into this area it would snap in place, so I had to work out a way to make it so, okay, we're going into a new area now, we need to smooth but not lock to the new position. So that's what this does here. And then when we go into this bottom area here now, it focuses on this. So the idea is when you overlap in two areas like this, it takes both areas and then it compiles them into a new bounding box. It takes the highest point and it takes the lowest point and creates a bounding box from it. It checks between the two. It goes, okay, this is the lowest point of this bounding box and this is the lowest point of this bounding box. This one's lower, so we use this one. This is the highest point of this one and this is the highest point of this one. This is higher, so we'll take this one. You can kind of see this visually because when we enter this, it comes up like a purple box to tell us this is the new area that we're focusing on. So then this is then true, so we walk down here, we'll enter this area and then it'll do like an area for these two areas, and then we can kind of go down here and then so we can dynamically walk through the corridors and it looks cool. If we turn the gizmos back off, you can kind of see it working without it. But in the future I plan to kind of improve the camera so when you're sprinting, the camera kind of heads a little ahead of the character. There'll also be situations where when you hit an enemy, there'll be like a bit of logic to kind of center the camera between you and the target and all that kind of stuff. But as of right now, this is having it just anchored directly on the center of the character is good enough. What you might notice now is we've got these little areas between these rooms, which are obviously doors. So the other part of this is these rooms then have to load in and out. You'll see that the other rooms that were here before are no longer here. So these are all turned off at the moment. So then if I go up to the door and I interact with it, the door opens, the character moves through it. While it's moving, the character can't move or attack or interact or anything like that. So there's, say if I were to try and activate the door from this angle, I had a bug originally that caused the character to kind of run into the wall, but now it will like run, line itself, open the door and then move through. In the future I want it so the character continues to look at the door when they're moving, so they kind of sidestep and then look while they're looking at the door, and then the door opens. And I may have animations for the door actually swinging open or something. I'm not sure how I'm going to do it just yet, but they just slide up at the moment like sci-fi doors. This is the same with these side doors. But the other thing you'll notice is with this door in particular, you'll notice that it's kind of gone a bit transparent. It knows when it's in this room it has to be opaque, and then when it's in this room it has to be transparent. Yeah, so the door in the next room isn't there. They only appear. So you'll notice when the room first loads in, the doors are actually not present. Because as of right now, when we open the door, the next room loads in, and you'll notice over here, like this area over here, there's nothing. And then when we open the door, we can see the next room. I plan to change this. I've got a plan of how I'm going to do it. I won't go too much into it because it's not that important, but this kind of scene into the next room is going to be a little bit different, and it'll be the same here as well when you open this. What I also had to do to make this actually work, especially when you're moving from this room downward. Right, so for a second the room does not load in until the character's moved in there, and you'll notice the character walks on thin air for a little moment. So you'll see that there's actually like a floor that's connected to this doorway. So that's so there's still collision when you go into the next room. I've had to do this like to make sure that all the collision still continues to work when you walk through. But what these doorways are probably going to actually look like is there's going to be a bit more of an extension on the back of them. But I'll kind of mess with that, with this idea, to try and work out exactly how I'm going to get the doors to work. But as of right now, it kind of works. It's kind of a bit of a workaround at the moment. And the other thing I forgot to talk about, which is again to do with like kind of similar to how the doors go invisible, you'll notice that this wall is not here at the moment. This is so we can obviously visually see the area correctly. But then when we walk into this section, we'll notice the wall comes in. I'm probably going to make these walls actually fade in and out, but as of right now, they just pop in. But this is so we can actually have like proper visibility. Otherwise, if this wall was here, if this wall was actually here, you'd have this problem here, where you can't really see the character in certain positions. And as of right now, even though it seems like not a lot has been done, a lot of big changes have been made here. So now we're actually kind of starting to get the idea of what a dungeon's going to function like. So we will kind of be exploring these kind of places, going in and out of the doors. And I'll kind of have that kind of Zelda-esque aspect to it, where when you enter a room, and there's like enemies spawn in the room, you're kind of locked in the room, you can't go out the doors until the enemies are dead. As I said, I want to have larger rooms that are like a bit more expansive and have a bit more layers, like verticality and stuff to them. So you could imagine you could kind of go up the staircase here, and there'll be like a doorway higher up, and you'll go onto like the second floor and all that kind of stuff. Next, I'm going to be focusing on the AI for enemies. Fortunately, I've already developed an in-depth tool for this, so fingers crossed that their introduction will be swift and easy. If you enjoyed the video and you're looking forward to seeing more, leave a like, comment and subscribe. It all aids in the war against the algorithm gods. And if you want to support the project financially, I do have a Patreon, but be warned, no bills will be going up anytime soon. Eventually I'll get around to revamping the Patreon page, but at the moment progressing the game has been my priority. Since the last devlog, a couple of new patrons have joined, both of which have been incredibly helpful. So special thanks to Eraser, they offered some insight and helped me resolve the armor loading issue I spoke about last devlog. And to Am Hidden, he drew this awesome picture of our protagonist rocking her leather armor, and he offered to help me with a few other art related things in the future. Once again, thank you to all patrons for supporting, you're very much appreciated. And speaking of the algorithm gods, I suggest you click here in case you missed the last devlog. It's most likely they didn't like the risque content, so if you're curious what that could possibly be, click it. And if you're going to do none of that, would you kindly bugger off?
Maybe.